Hey guys, it's time for another custom Nendoroid, and today I'm turning Wonder Woman into the Warrior Princess. Since Xena is my absolute childhood heroine, I just had to do this project because I always wanted her to be represented in my collection. For this project, there is no better base than the Wonder Woman Nendoroid. She already has a very similar outfit and almost every accessory that I needed for my Xena. The only other parts I needed were the hair pieces, which came from the Eli Ayase training version and from a Saber Nendoroid More extra set. Since the hair pieces came from a new and an older Nendoroid, they didn't fit together. So I had to adjust those pieces by cutting off these little extra parts from the front piece and straightening the back hair piece. Now they fit together and the gap is already much smaller than before. I wasn't quite happy with how pointy the saber bangs looked, so I straightened them with my hobby knife to get the look I wanted. The next thing on my list was the upper body part. There were small adjustments that needed to be done. I cut off the buckles of the shoulder strap and sanded down the rest of the leather harness. On the skirt, I cut off the Wonder Woman emblem and all the other symbols on the belt to even the surface. I also had to get rid of the leather parts on the hands, so I took some nail polish remover to remove the color and afterwards sand the hands to have them all in her skin color. The sword also needed a little sanding and some other adjustments. Now it was time for the most important thing to her outfit, which is the iconic breastplate. I used some green stuff in combination with oil to sculpt the armor pieces so the green stuff wouldn't stick to the tools and also to get a smooth surface. For the sword I used the exact same method. I think I could have prepared the sword a little better to get more resemblance to a sword because now it looks a bit bulky, but since I didn't, this has to do now. Returning to my hair pieces, there were some gaps that still needed attention. So I filled this little hole and made a braided hairband to go over the huge gap between the hair pieces. Since I ran out of green stuff, I had to use Milliput, which honestly wasn't the best experience. It was way too crumbly for my liking, fell apart quite often and didn't stick very well. It took me quite some time to get used to it. If you have any tips or tricks for working with Milliput, I would really appreciate it if you let me know in the comments. While everything else was drying, I added the missing shoulder strap to the outfit and sculpted her shoulder pieces as well. The skirt was really stressing me out. It took 3 sculpting attempts to realize that there was no way for me to get the look and the details I wanted. The first attempt looked quite good but ended up way too big and just looked silly. Another problem I was faced with was the missing flexibility. If I sculpted the skirt, there was no way of getting the legs back in without breaking everything. So I decided to just cut and reshape the existing skirt and just get as close as possible to the look I was after. I originally wanted to give more volume to her hair and decided to add some extra strands. But after painting I realized it just looked absolutely messy and didn't really fit with the character, so you can just ignore this part. Now that everything was sculpted, it was time to prepare my pieces for painting. I used white primer for everything except for pieces that had to remain the skin color. Here I just went with a clear varnish to prime those parts. One thing that really scared me were the faceplates. I really wanted to keep Wonder Woman's eye shape, and since I'm not good with painting eyes myself, I decided to try and just change the eye color by simply and very carefully painting over the iris and change them from brown to blue. I did this in a couple of layers and was very happy with how it turned out. Now it was time for painting the rest. I used a dark brown for the leather parts. And again, the skirt was my biggest enemy. Since the material of the skirt is very rubbery, the primer and the paint would crack and peel very easily if the pieces were moved. Since I didn't have anything else than acrylic paint, I just had to live with it and be very careful. I also had to do some touch-ups after I had everything assembled because the paint had cracks from putting the legs back in. Do you have any tips for painting rubbery parts that need to contain flexibility? Let me know in the comments. For the armor pieces, weapons and other decorative things on her outfit, I used metallic gold in a couple of layers and afterwards dry brushed it with black to give the pieces a more worn and weathered effect. I also did this with the leather pieces. Last thing missing was the hair pieces. Since these were bigger parts, I used my airbrush to avoid brush strokes. As you can see, my added hair strands are still in place, but after assembling everything, I didn't like how they looked and removed them. To give her hair more depth, I wanted to add some shading. Black is always difficult when it comes to shading, since there's nothing darker than black. What I did instead was using dark brown pastels and carefully brush them into the creases. This step is not really necessary, but I think it gives so much detail and life to a paint job. You can also do this with other parts to add some dimension. And now that we are done, let's have a look at my warrior princess. And here she is, the final product. And I have to say, I couldn't have found a better base for this project because it just fits perfectly. And I have to say, I'm very happy with how she turned out. And now it's time to think about my next project. If you have any suggestions for other custom Nendoroids we could do, please let us know in the comments and maybe we'll see you with that project in the next video. Bye bye!